Hello everybody, my name is The Watching Relic, and welcome to the review / slideshow. I'm doing it all in one because I barely have any pictures of her. This is Odessa, goddess of the elements. So, this video might not look super great. She is really a lot bigger than any of my other MOCs. She's a weird shape as well, and she's kind of a pain in the butt to light. So in terms of the pure visuals, this might be some of the worst production value that you're going to have to deal with on this channel. So anyhow, at least in terms of video reviews, some of the old slideshows were kind of poor quality, but anyhow. So yes, this was my entry to the preliminary round of the BioCup 2018. The BioCup, you've probably heard of it. It's this huge Bionicle MOC contest. They used to have it over on MOC pages, then it was dead for a few years, and then last year they revived it on Flickr. This has been so much fun. It's brought out so many amazing entries. It's this big, long, sort of tournament-style contest where slowly people get eliminated until it's down to just one person. I made it past the prelims and round 1, and I'm currently building for round 2. I'll get to my round 1 entry soon. It's a little bit different than this. For now, let's talk about my entry that I put into the prelims. So yes, this is Odessa. Now, the theme for the prelims was elements. They usually go for a pretty classic mainstream sort of theme for the first round, the eliminatory or preliminary round, and so elements was perfectly appropriate and pretty much like what I expected. And there were a lot of ideas I had for this. Originally, I wanted to do something with helium. I thought about doing something based on the movie Up, like balloons, helium, yeah. But I was like, you know what? That sounds hard. Let's make a dragon. So I made a dragon, and you know what? I think it worked out all just fine. I'm not perfectly satisfied with this MOC. It has flaws, but overall, I like it. So, anyhow, as far as, like, inspirations for making an elemental dragon go with all these different limbs that are different elements, there wasn't anything really specific that triggered that. One more specific thing that I was thinking about was flying Eastern dragons. This style of a serpentine, wingless dragon that's floating or flying, slithering through the air almost. You don't see that in Bionicle too much. Normally, if there's Eastern-style dragons as MOCs, they're on their feet. And that's originally what I was going to do here, but I had this idea to put her in this pose, and I think it turned out good. I've even given her body a tighter, more extreme curve than in her pose in her original photos. I wish I had known how to pose her a little better when I originally photographed her, but that's all in the past. It's fine. The only other MOCs I can really think of that do this are, there's these twin MOCs by, I believe, Jafa, called Yin and Yang, that are these cool black and white Eastern dragons that are flying. But anyhow, so definitely an underrepresented art style for dragons. You see it a lot in just general graphic art. But another sort of inspiration for this MOC specifically has to do with how it's built. And I'll get a little more into the specifics of this, especially with the torso later. But for now, basically the main kind of idea with how this MOC is built is the idea was to build a big creatureoid MOC, a large non-humanoid, primarily out of CCBS. Now, generally, you've probably seen this before. You probably think of CCBS as, you know, mobility and articulation. You might expect something like this to be built very traditionally. Here's a couple torso pieces, maybe just one torso, standard CCBS limbs. No. The idea here was to not utilize CCBS for its articulation, like it often is, but to utilize it for its stability and its flexibility, almost as a material to sculpt out of. So I sort of, I wasn't thinking about using CCBS to take advantage of tons of joints so that she could move all around. She has a lot of articulation, but it's weird articulation, and we'll get into that. The main idea was to make a MOC that was surprisingly stable, a little bit lighter than it might be if it had traditional, more technic connections. So there's tons of balls and sockets connections that are not joints, just structural connections. And that was kind of the neat concept here, I think. It's not the first time that something like that's been done, but I think this exact style of building a large MOC out of CCBS worked out great because she's not as complicated and convoluted as she might be if she was primarily technic, and again, I think the stability increased as well. Getting into the design, the tail is not the best part, not the worst either. The worst goes to one of the limbs, and yeah, one of the big flaws here is this end of the tail area, because I used these second to shortest CCBS bones. I wanted to use the very shortest, but the store that I was getting stuff from for this MOC didn't have any. I didn't want to make multiple orders. I couldn't find any in my collection, so I ended up settling for the second shortest instead of the very shortest, and you end up with these little sections that are as thin as axles, and it's a bit of a drop-off from the rest of the tail that's a lot thicker, and it doesn't look great. This was a comment that one of the judges from the BioCup had about this MOC, is that was honestly one of the big weak points. It seems like a nitpick, but it detracts from it. So that's one thing I would like to improve, one thing I would change if I could go back and rebuild this, which maybe I will someday, who knows, probably not, but whatever. And I do like the little tail tip. I think the little chain and spike is really fun, and then the other spikes are just whatever. The main part of the tail is just 2 rows of CCBS bones put together. They're connected up here with just a single pin that you can see right in there. That just connects these 2 limbs together. It looks okay. It's a little gappy from some angles, as you can tell. Yeah, oh dear. But it looks okay if you are looking at it from the right way. And it does have a little bit of purple. The purple bones were more evenly spaced out, and then as the shape sort of got developed, I forgot to move them. So now it's like 2 purple ones right next to each other, one way up here, one back there. And I also got to use these pieces from Quake Beast, these big purple, like frickin' crystal rock parts, I guess you could call them. I'm so glad I finally got to use those. Those seemed so unusable at first, and I finally found a little NPU for them. I'm happy with that. Originally they were on top, but they're so big and clunky that they curve the bones they're on, because they clank into each other, so the bones have to be curved a little for them to fit next to each other. When they were on top, that created a convex curve, so I wanted a concave one, so I put them on bottom, and now the whole curvature of the tail is nicer than it originally was. And that's pretty much the tail. Talking about the legs, the water leg, I guess I'll use as sort of the example of how these are built. You can pretty much see it. There's basically one long series of bones that ends in the little claws, and then a secondary series of bones to bulk it up. And they move, totally independently. It's sort of like 2 limbs sort of just squished together haphazardly. It's okay. It doesn't suck. It means that articulation is achievable but awkward to do practically, but I think visually it's fine. Now, as far as how the limbs are built, there's really not that many interesting parts usages. It's just CCBS stuff. I got to use more of these big crystal rock pieces, so that's nice. And I also used this Crystal Beast head, which is just like friction connection in there. It has a little lightsaber bar going through with a stud pin on the end of it that's threaded through one of the gaps in the ribcage torso piece there. So that's actually pretty neat. The air/jungle leg does have another little NPU in it. There's a brain attack skull/head piece that you can see right there that's just shoved down into that gap created by the larger skeleton ribcage piece again. And other than that, that's fine. These 2 limbs are completely, the legs are completely solid colors. The arms are not. I'll just go into the arms now, why not? The stone arm is too bulky in my opinion. I don't really like the way it looks. It just looks too thick and the lighting is washing it out. There you go. And then this one is not entirely the same color because it's silver and dark gray. And it also has a little bit of old silver in those Exoforce arms there, so it's a little less even, but it's fine. I do think it could be slimmed down a little. I think this torso armor I used up here with those little bar connections looks not quite right. It throws off the texturing a little, in my opinion. Overall, that's the worst part of the MOC, in my opinion, that limb right there. The stone arm is my least favorite in terms of execution. I think, concept is fine. Using those big rock pieces is fun, but it could be refined as a design. Turning down the exposure here so you can actually see the ice arm. The ice arm is perhaps the messiest of the arms in terms of the way it looks. It's also the only one with a really strikingly different color in it, which is the light translucent blue. But I think it's cool because that's the same color that the water leg is, and water and ice are the same thing in different forms, so that's kind of cool. And I also like that I got to use these big fur-looking white pieces. I've really wanted those for a while. Those, they are nice parts. And then this one up here is just connected with an Exoforce arm. There's another little Exoforce arm there for detail, and some little claw spike bits coming in. That's all based off of one of those Savage Planet Hero Factory pieces with all the nice bar connections on it. I think the ice arm is fine. The legs are better than the arms, but whatever. And there's another look at, you can really see that headpiece shoved in there as well. And there's what I'm talking about with the limbs each sort of being 2 limbs. I took off the stone arm so we could get a look at the torso cross-section a little bit. And yeah, basically each of the limbs is basically 2 limbs smushed together and connected to 2 ball joints. There you can see there's that double ball joint connection, one there, from 2 torso pieces within the larger torso. And the way I built this torso, it's actually 6 HF classic torso pieces. I think I used the wider shoulders down on the ends and the thinner shoulders in the middle. So basically imagine three torso pieces connected with the CCBS limbs with the sockets on both sides, so 2 of those little double socket bones connecting 3 torsos. Then imagine that whole assembly again, and then those 2 big assemblies, 6 torsos in total, being sandwiched together with those big light gray H-shaped pin connectors. There's those big pin connectors, there's the L's and the H's. I use the H's, obviously, and that's the base construction. That's how you end up with those nice double ball joint hips and shoulders for the way the limbs are built. And it created a decent shaping, made it solid, simple, worked out really nice, I think. It also created the double ball joint connections for the double neck and tail. Everything along with the limbs are kind of constructed that way. Okay, I'm gonna leave on auto exposure here just so you can see the torso, because like when you go up here it's brighter and down here it's darker, so hopefully auto exposure doesn't look terrible, because sometimes it does. But anyhow, here's a look at kind of how it's built. You can see, I mean, not really how it's built, but just what's built into it. There's a lot packed in here. A lot of it is just the same parts over and over again. Lots of CCBS bones and shells. You can see that one nice little spike piece in there a little bit. That's nice. That's one of the few more unique pieces used. And some of the other more unique pieces used, we have these big pieces from Storm Beast. Oh, you can see one of the H connectors in there I was talking about. You have this big thing from Storm Beast's gimmick. Storm Beast, of course, had that big marionette puppet thing going on. One of these big piston pieces. It's attached with a little mixel ball joint that goes into that old Bionicle limb. And then it's also attached to more mixel ball joints that are up here that actually go through a whole bunch of pins, you know, or like a whole like apparatus of pins that connects all the way back into these hand connectors. So these hand connectors, you can see the little stud pin type piece coming out there, or the, not stud pin, bushing pin coming out there. And that goes all the way down through one of those female pin sleeve type pieces that attaches to a mixel ball joint that attaches this. So like this attaches all the way like through the torso. I'd take it apart if well, you know what, I might. Okay, there you go. There's the whole series of pieces. You should be able to roughly tell what those all are. Oh my god, my exposure is so bright, sorry. But anyhow, yeah, so that just threads all the way through the gap and goes back into the hand connector, and that's how that works. It's not a huge thing, but I think that's kind of fun. Another very minor, interesting parts usage is, well, it's actually just the way it is. There's a sideways CCBS shell in there. That's kind of fun. I think this torso looks nice. I think it has an overall decent shaping. It's not a perfect curvature. Sort of has a bit of a bend there, like almost like her belly is sort of curling in a little. So I wish it was more of a perfect semicircle, but it's alright for what it is, especially when all the arms are actually attached. I think it's alright. I think my least favorite part is these fire printed pieces. They don't quite work for me. I thought they would be a good transition from black to red, but they really just introduce orange and even silver and other stuff like that, as you can see. It just, it's okay, I guess. In general, it's definitely not my least favorite part by a long shot, but my favorite part is actually the fire section. Up here by the shoulders, we have one of those big Savage Planet paw pieces again with all the bar connections as the chest. This little CCBS shell here is literally just set down in here with a Technic piece to kind of keep it in place. It holds in better when the stone arm is attached, but yeah, it's just there to kind of fill in space. And as far as how the neck looks, I really like the way the neck looks. Like, look at that. You got a pretty decent repeating pattern type thing going on. That's always fun. I don't get to do that type of stuff too often with the way I build, and the things I usually build are just small humanoids, so this big, long repeating pattern of parts it was fun. It was a little different. And I also like the color blocking. It's subtle, but it's there. You have translucent shells on the bottom, then opaque shells, and then translucent spikes on top. It's like a translucent sandwich with opaque jelly. Anyhow, and the tubes are just set in there. They don't always look great, but I think they fill in space and do what they're supposed to do. Now the head is something I'm surprisingly proud of. There's a lot of little details I like. She has these big system pieces sticking out. It's almost like if a frilled lizard had like all the skin ripped off its frill and you just saw like the bones under there. I don't even know if that's how frills on frilled lizards are anatomically. I could be totally wrong, but that's kind of how I imagine this, is like the bones of a frill, these big horns sticking out in kind of an interesting formation. I think that looks nice. There's a little bit of black in there because of the Technic that connects it, but that surprisingly doesn't bug me as much as I thought it would. She also has these nice little flame devil horns, like these little inward pointing flame pieces on the end of these like horn structures, so that's kind of fun. And then I also like, she has a tiny goatee. There we go, you can see it there. And then her eyes are, you can kind of see the corner of what that is. That is a little 2x1 smooth tile in translucent neon green, and it's actually a vent or a grate tile, like one of those things that you'd use as a vent or a grate as detailing on a system build, or a non-system build for that matter. And it's just sort of shoved in there, and I mean, this head is interesting. It's pretty much just two CCBS shells and a little add-on armor bit from Hero Factory, and it's really simple. It's so simple I thought it'd be a placeholder for a better head. I ended up keeping it because I like that it's so simple, and I like that I was able to achieve a surprising amount of expression and kind of dynamic appearance with this. I like that the eyes are very far forward on the head, kind of a unique look, I think, and in general, I'm so surprised with how nice this came out. Okay, so I'm just going to quickly bring in the size comparisons. There's Gresh, and there are the minifigures. So obviously she's a little bigger than what I normally build. That was my chair squeaking, I'm sorry. So my overall thoughts on this thing, I think this turned out better than I thought it was going to, in some ways. It has flaws. The tail is kind of gappy, kind of skinny up top, doesn't look great. The torso is not perfect, it's a little clunky in some parts, the shaping isn't all there. But in general, this MOC has some things I really like. I think the best part, my favorite part of this whole creation, is the overall silhouette. The curvature is like really surprisingly nice on it. Just look at that. Her overall shape and silhouette, it's like really not terrible, and she looks very graceful, very fluid in her movement. Well, I mean, she's not actually moving, but just in the way you'd imagine her to move, very serpentine. I like it. I think I achieved something nice there. In general, I think as an experiment in building something big out of CCBS in this way, I think it was successful because she is a little more stable and light than she might have been if she was more Technic-based, and that's cool. Her sort of stand here, I forgot to talk about this. I mean, it's purely structural. I didn't even show the bottom of the stand in the original pictures because, like, you're not supposed to see this. So that's that. But anyhow, like, this is the exact same stuff I used as scaffolding. Speaking of which, one cool thing about this MOC is it was kind of different from anything I've built simply in the way I had to attach parts. Like, it was being held up by literal scaffolding, or, well, literal Lego scaffolding anyway, on a little, like, stool in the middle of my room, and I was walking around it without actually moving it to attach parts. I've never built anything like that before. I felt like I was half construction worker, half surgeon. It was a really fun kind of educational experience in building something very much not necessarily out of my comfort zone, but just different from what I've been doing. So, anyhow, sorry this was so long. Here are the size comparisons. This was Odessa, Goddess of the Elements, and the Watching Relic signing out. Crap, that's the outro for my other channel. My name is the Watching Relic, and I will see you all next time. There we go.